Well, hello there, my dear. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I'm looking forward to tonight's show for sure.
Oh yeah, I am too. This is the big one. This is the battle of wits and
Yes.
how the profiler or interviewer does it as they're up against the killer, the monster, whatever is going on, or the suspect. So this is going to be a good one. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, like we do, if you have any questions, for the end of the show, all caps, so we know. Anybody, anytime you say hi and stuff like that, I do appreciate it. During the meat of the show, I tend not to see anything because I'm blind as a bat. And, of course, I'll go back into the show after and acknowledge everybody through Facebook. But, the biggest thing, probably the thing you just guys saw in the little commercial, Connecticut Paracon is coming up.
Yes.
It's July 11th, and it's going to be great. We got the first ever Jason from the first Friday the 13th movie, and of course one of the most recent fan favorites, James Stokes. So first and recent is a pretty cool contrast, and tons of people coming. Paranormal, cryptozoologists, anything you can think of, UFO people. Of course, I'll be there doing a little true crime like we're doing tonight. So any questions you have in any of those genres, you will have somebody to talk to at Connecticut Paracon, www.paracon2ns.org for all your info, tickets, hotel stay, everything's all in one. So it's going to be exciting. But what do you got coming up, my dear? You got some stuff coming up, and got the big powwow coming up this weekend?
I do. We head out tomorrow, and it's actually Saturday, which is I'm so looking forward to it. Besides that, the first part of June, I'm going to Wisconsin for the Bearded Brothers Brawl, and I always have to say it slow. And then I've got a couple other things, but hopefully I get to Connecticut. That is the plan. It depends. I also have to have surgery this week on my shoulder, so wish me luck, everybody. That is kind of what everything depends on, if I get to go to everything I want to. It's doing good. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You never know what's going to happen, especially now. I found out today that, my aunt is in hospice.
Yes,
so
so
I don't know what my schedule is going to be like for the next, week or whatever. God forbid she doesn't have to suffer for too long, but I got to keep that travel in mind too. So, I do plan on doing next week's show, but you never know. And we'll
if
play
not,
it by
we'll
ear.
exactly. If not, we'll do a rerun, and we won't do that unless we need to. But if we need to, there it is. So
we'll get our prayer warriors out there and throw that out there. I usually don't talk about that type of stuff, but it's just on my mind. So I thought I'd get it off before I feed you guys some of this information. And, it's going to be, I got chock full of information. I'd love to talk a little bit longer with you, Gwen, but you know what time it is. Let's zoom in and uncover the criminal mind. All right, folks. Again, appreciate you guys tuning in. This is a big one tonight. This is the actual nitty gritty, what we talked about, the history, the types of serial killers, what kind of motivation they have, the psychological side of things. So we really dove deep, and getting evidence is another big one, because really when you look at it for the type we're going to do tonight, the interrogation or the questioning, it's involved quite significantly. If you really look at the old shows, they put the bright light on you, and they're trying to coerce you into admitting you did something wrong and trying to make you sweat out. A lot of that has gone by the wayside. It's more sophisticated, psychological. A lot of the driven methods now, it's like more of a rapport building, behavioral analysis, of course, rather than that coercion. The most prominent framework currently used is a high value detainee interrogation group standards, which favor more of the peace model. We'll go into that, and the cognitive interviewing over the older, more confrontational, the old Reed technique that we used to do. It's more of the factual analysis, behavior interview. It was a 9-step interrogation designed to move suspects from denial to confession. it relies on a confrontational psychological tactics to overcome suspect resistance. So they really don't do that too much anymore. It's a discernment too of, you know, if you got them on the run, then yeah, you might want to try and put a little confrontational in there. So that's probably the big part of that. But we're going to really go into right up front. We're going to talk about more what the interviewer does, what to look out for, and what kind of resistance the suspect might be doing, the different types of questioning, how we question somebody that might be of the higher IQ, the serial killer, more the trying to get one over on us. So those types of tactics. So we'll try and get through that pretty quickly tonight and all, and make sure I get all the information in. And the first part, the peace model, is what we're going to go off of. That's one of the things that we picked up from the British. So their standards are refined by a federal behavioral scientist. The peace model is a non-confrontational and aims to gather information rather than force a confession. So, of course, with anything, you know, whether we're questioning people, whether we're doing a paranormal investigation or anything like that, preparation and planning. So the investigator, we're going to want to create a profile of the suspect's personality, triggers, and intelligence level. So these are things we're going to want to look for before we actually sit down with them. So that background type of check, so we know what we're dealing with and how we're going to question and what kind of things that we're going to do to make sure we keep that things non-confrontational. So we have to engage and explain, building a working relationship. So the interrogator, of course, will establish a baseline for the suspect's normal behavior, or what we like to call, we want to know their truth. So account, clarify, and challenge. The suspect is encouraged to tell their story without interruption. So we don't want to interrupt them. We want them to tell their story. The interrogator, of course, then uses strategic use of evidence, which we call sue. So that's to point out inconsistencies without calling the suspect a liar, because once you do that, you're going to lose all credibility in any rapport that we built. So the closure, summarizing the account to ensure that no misunderstandings, evaluation. We're going to review all the interrogations, see what we learned and how the investigator performed. So we're putting that all together with that type of model called the peace model. So there's the behavioral baseline is what we want to dive into. That's where we look for leakage, a small leakage, involuntary physical or verbal cues that occurred when a person is under stress. Of course, you guys got to realize it doesn't matter. A lot of them are going to be under stress, and we're going to see that. But sometimes when the stress isn't there, those are those, you know, the psychopaths where we talk about, you know, their behavior patterns and all that. Sometimes they don't show that stress because they're not feeling. So those are the things we have to look out for and know ahead of time and how we're going to question. But we want to establish our baseline, what we call our truth. You want to ask neutral question, like what's the weather like outside, those reports to see how the suspect looks and sounds when they're telling the truth. There's a cognitive load that we look at. The interrogators may ask a suspect to tell their story in reverse. It's not like you're going all the way into reverse, but you're getting a timeline. Like if you know the sequence of events, sometimes we're going to say, hey, you know, the event occurred at 8 o'clock. So we're going to say, you know, at 9 o'clock, what was going on? Hey, can you go back and let me know what was going on at 6 o'clock? So if you're taking them all over the place, they're not able to put that, you know, story together, because when people tell a story, they want a beginning, middle, and an end. So if you switch it around on them, we tend to maybe figure out that something's wrong. They can't put it together because we didn't give them the ability to create. So there's the chronological order. So the lying requires immense mental effort, adding the load of a reverse timeline like we talked about, or causes the suspect's deceptive narrative to crumble because they cannot maintain the lie in a complex task simultaneously, like we're talking about, putting it all over the place because they got to think too much. A lot of times when they pause like that and they start creating, then we know we have a certain way to move the questioning another way when that happens. So there's the themes and personalities, behaviors characterize suspects based on motivations. So there's our interrogation styles then tailored to that specific type. So there are strategies and all that. So you might figure that somebody's inadequate, low self-esteem about themselves. So what we want to do is to really get that rapport with somebody like that is more the flattery and the validation. So we want to act as a mentor or the only person who understands why the suspects did what they did. So that's that part. Then we got the classic narcissist. So we want to be challenging and admiring, appealing to their ego, of course, their big egos, or intelligence, suggesting that the crime was so brilliant, only they could have pulled it off. So that's one big thing, because they want to take credit. And then we have our antisocial psychopathic. That's more of a logical, transactional. We want to appeal to their self-interest. They won't confess out of guilt. So the interrogator focuses on what the deal or benefit the suspect gets by talking. So we have to have something in it for them. So that's what we have to do. Environmental manipulation. This is something, physical spaces is often designed for us to influence the suspect's psychology. So, when somebody's in your personal space, you tend to get a little nervous and start talking a little bit. So that's our proximity. So sometimes we want to move a little closer to the suspect. So we want to increase the pressure or move away to signal safety. So give them a little bit of room. That way we could come back in if we have to. So there's barriers like removing the desk or chairs between the investigator and the suspect to create a sense of vulnerability or openness. Lighting and temperature, while not the hot lamp and the myth in all the movies, but the room slightly to be cool can keep a suspect alert and physically uncomfortable, making them more likely to want to finish up and leave. So sometimes if the room temperature is uncomfortable, they'll tend to say what they need to say, hopefully, truthfully. But one of the big things is with evidence. So especially when we have the evidence we need, like I said, we want to make sure we do all our due diligence before we bring a suspect in. Accuse them with evidence or without evidence is a big thing. And that's the strategic use of evidence, what we call SUE. One of the most, a boy named Sue, Johnny Cash, but that's how I remembered it back in that day. But one of the most effective behavioral methods is withholding the evidence. Instead of showing the suspect a fingerprint immediately, the interrogator will ask questions related to this location. If the suspect lies and says that they were never there, the interrogator has caught them in a verifiable lie. This creates a psychological trap where the suspect realizes the story is no longer tenable. So we got them with the evidence, but we don't let them know that we have it. So we're letting them see what they're going to say. Another thing, we like to call it the bait question. Probably the best scenario is really looking at this. I always like to ask the question, is there any reason, giving them that way out? Is there any reason this, any reason that? It triggers the psychology, and we're planting a mind virus, the nice way of putting it. I like to call it planting the mind fuck, minus my swearing here. But I know you want to get out of here. Thank you for coming in. We have 20 officers working on a video and downloading everything they can get to the bottom of the situation. So we're trying to build that rapport. Like, we're doing everything we can to get you out of here. We want you to be comfortable. We don't want to keep you longer than we have to. We're working on this. But then let me start with just one thing. Is there any reason at all your vehicle might show up on any pieces of video these officers are reviewing right now? So we want to keep in mind the suspect knows they were there. I didn't say I had a video or the evidence. I just said they were working on stuff. I just raised the stakes to that person. Now the suspect has to say, no, I wasn't there, and risk having the car on the video making them suspect number one. Or yes, I might have stopped the store a few minutes either way. We put them at the crime scene, so we have them both ways. So we put them into that corner by giving them that bait question and working off their psychology to funnel that in. A lot of times we're going to have that evidence anyways, but this way we want to see what we're dealing with. So, when we're interrogating a high stakes suspect like a serial killer, so that's the big one, the focus has to shift. We're looking for the lies. We want to identify deviations from their established baseline or their truth, because a lot of these individuals possess high levels of narcissism, antisocial traits, standard nervousness cues that most people have. like sweating or fidgeting. These high stakes people, they don't have any of that. So that's absent. So we have to take a different look at that. Even when you're dealing with people in daily life and who you're dealing with when it comes to a situation that we have to question to get a particular subject going forward, especially with something like this. But, there's that linguistics deflection and depersonalization. Subjects often use language to distance themselves from the gravity of the crime. So in these high stake ones, a lot of times they will talk the third person shift. If you guys ever heard that, they may refer to the victim as it, the body, or that person to remove any human connection. Past, present tense. If a subject describes a missing person in the past tense before a body has been found, he says, she was a nice girl. It could indicate guilty knowledge of the victim's fate. So we really have to see how they're using their words. A lot of times it's oversharing irrelevant details, like providing an exhaustive minute-by-minute account of their day to appear helpful while glossing over the specific time frame of the crime. So we know it happened at a different time, but a lot of times they'll delay. They'll start saying, in the morning I had breakfast and blah, blah, blah. And they're telling me things I really don't, that are irrelevant. I don't really need to hear. They're trying to avoid that moment that they're feeling guilty, but maintaining that control they feel that they have by telling irrelevant stories. So one big thing is a lot of poker players use this stuff, those micro expressions of contempt or joy or anything like that, while they maintain a mask of cooperation, a mask of sanity. So they have involuntary facial movements that can betray their internal state. So duping delight, a fleeting, inappropriate smile or smirk when they believe they have successfully misled the interrogator. It is a brief flash of satisfaction at their perceived intellectual superiority. So that's a big one. Asymmetrical expressions, a sneer or a one-side pull of the lip. Contempt often appears when an investigator asks a question that subject deems stupid or beneath them. So those are the things that we're looking at, like, they think we caught me, you didn't catch me, and they have a little smirk. So we're looking out for those really to pinpoint in how we're going to move the conversation a little bit further. So we're funneling in on these high stakes type of people. So our power dynamics and posturing. For many serial offenders, the interrogation is a continuation of the game or the hunt. So they want to trying to get one over on us. They're treating us like they're victims and all that, and how they're going to talk their way out of this. So again, it's the chess match that we're playing with, knowing the information, taking in the information they are giving us. Sometimes you want to make these people feel like they're in control by, of course, deeming towards, like a narcissist, to make them feel like they're the best person. So that way they feel comfortable. We want them comfortable because it's nothing better than pulling the rug out from under them and knowing that we got you. And that's usually when they're going to give in. So the power dynamics, posturing, and all that they might do. So an invasion of space. So the game or the hunt, this is when the person we're interviewing tries to put that dominance over. So an invasion of space, they may lean forward into the interrogator's personal space or maintain intense eye-blinking eye contact to assert dominance. So they're mirroring the interrogator also, which is something we might do. So it's like a game of cat and mouse there. So they're mirroring us right back. So if the subject begins to mimic your posture or your speech pattern, so if I'm talking louder, they're going louder, we're going back and forth. They're often attempting to build a false rapport to manipulate the flow of the conversation. So we got our attempts to turn the tables, asking the interrogator like personal questions, which happens all the time. That was the big thing, the 24/7, they try and get one over on you when I worked in the prison system. So that's one of the big things they would try and do, is try and get personal information about you in a nondescript way or listening in. So you guys be careful what you said about yourself. So it was always officer, whoever you were. But, the critiquing the investigation's methods to shift the role of authority in the room. So that's a big one to look out for. So there's tactical silence in processing. So there's the artificial pause that we hear. It's a watch for a delay before answering an easy baseline question. If they have to think about what their favorite food is or where they work, they are likely over monitoring their responses. So now they're like delaying. Sometimes we like to delay because then they start to like talk a lot more, because when you have that pause after asking a question, they'll give you a lot more information. But these higher stake ones, that pause might be to try and throw us off, trying to change the baseline, basically their truth, by a simple question, putting that pause in there where we would think they were lying. But they're trying to take that away from us as the interviewer. We got to be careful of that with our baseline also, as they're trying to switch and turn the tables. So we have the narcissistic injury. So if the interrogator suggests the crimes are clumsy, unimportant, or work with an amateur, watch for a sudden shift from the calm to the cold rage. Because once you tell a narcissist, oh yeah, this is nothing, they have that ego. They can't help themselves for some reason. But a serial killer with a high ego may feel compelled to correct the record to ensure their work is properly credited and appreciated, leading to accidental admissions. So we got to love that. So our behavioral cues that we want to look at, the potential, the duping delight, what we talked about, satisfaction and successfully lying and manipulating, linguistics minimization, attempting to reduce the emotional impact of the act, our eye locking, an aggressive attempt to intimidate or read the interrogator, the need to lead. That's the attempting to direct the interrogation towards safe topics, like changing the subject, which a lot of people do when they're uncomfortable. So, but in forensic psychology, investigative settings and identifying deception relies on spotting our clusters of behaviors that deviate from a person's established baseline, our truths again. So no single gesture proves a lie. But certain physiological and verbal shifts often indicate cognitive load or emotional distress associated with being untruthful. So we got to keep in mind also deception is different within some cultures. So you have to be mindful of these truths or these subjects. Because I know the old saying is, you ask somebody a yes, yes or no question, and they're trying to agree with like you, and they start answering, but they're shaking their head, and you want them to say yes, and they're shaking their head, you would think they're lying. But in some cultures, like there's Indian cultures, that they just naturally shake their head. It's just part of their dynamic. So we can't really take that into consideration on that. So there's a lot of things to consider of culture, background, and those types of response, their truth response. If they're shaking their head when I start interviewing, then it may be something I have to throw out and not consider when I'm trying to get these tells or things like that to funnel the conversation to get where they're lying, and to get them to give up information, and to get them to admit these certain things that we want to, so that way we could get more factual stuff that's going to stand in court. But the physiological shifts, the automatic responses when someone is deceptive, the fight or flight response, the feeling of fight or flight, when somebody catches you in a lie and you feel like, oh my God, how am I going to get out of here? And all this other stuff. There's involuntary physical changes, that respiratory shift. The person may take deeper breaths, or their breath may become shallow and rapid. You might notice their shoulders rising or their voice becoming thin. So we're checking all of that stuff. There's the micro expressions. These are the fleeting facial expressions lasting only a fraction of a second. This reveals a person's true emotion before they can mask it as a poker face. So that micro time where they catch themselves to stay in control, but we have to look at that at all times. That's why we like to videotape the interrogation sometimes. You may not catch something, but somebody watching the monitor as you're saying might be able to tune in and let you know, hey, something's there. Let's look at this a little deeper. The eye dynamics, while the liars look up to the left theory, a lot of people say that. That's pretty much been debunked. A lot of us are going to look up either way, looking up towards your creative part of your brain. No, not necessarily, because it could go either way. Yeah, could you be lying? Yes. Or could you just be so nervous that I know I didn't do this, but I got to make sure I deliver what I'm saying properly and not miss anything so I could get out of this. But you want to look for the increase in blink rate. So that's the thing, is if I'm normally blinking and I start blinking a little bit more, my dilation of my pupils is a big thing. A lot what the FBI does now is during interrogations, they do have cameras that zoom in on the eyes, and we're watching for dilation and all that and how they check stuff, particularly that way. So there's involuntary reactions, the increased stress. So some of the question will close their eyes. Some of them will close their eyes and look down when saying yes. It's an uncomfortable agreement to try and press forward to control feelings. So they're like, yeah, like stuff like that. One of the people that was big on doing that during questioning, just to move through it, wanting to be in control, but they started talking about things when he was not in control, like his fantasies, was Dennis Rader, the BTK killer. If you ever look up on YouTube videos of the psychologist looking at him and watching him in court, you'll see how he'll say something when the judge is asking him about his fantasies. He'll close his eyes and do that. So you'll be able to see that in action if you want to go check that out, of course, after the show. But another big thing, behavioral adaptations, deceptive individuals who use physical barriers or grooming gestures to self-soothe. The ventral shield, people may subconsciously shield their vulnerable areas like the neck, the chest, the abdomen, the crossing of the arms, kind of hunching over or placing an object like, my soda can here, in a coffee cup or a bag between them and the interviewer. So they're covering something up. Almost when you're covering or doing that, it's like you're covering up the lie and showing physical traits of that. Pacifying actions, touching the substernal knots, the hollow of the base of your neck, the rubbing of the back of your neck, or wringing the hands, or methods used that some people use to lower their heart rate or calm their anxiety. Those are the things to look out for. Then another thing is the frozen statuesque pose. Contrary to the belief that liars fidget, there are some that become unnaturally still. They're focusing on so much mental energy on their story that they cease the natural fluid movements of a relaxed person. So they're very stiff, like unmoving and all that, which is very strange. It's to the point where, when somebody's doesn't care or they're lying a lot, when we show expression, like we'll lift our eyebrows, our brow will move, a lot of people that are, good, they have the crow's feet there over time. So our little wrinkles really show how we are. Unless you had Botox surgery and everything's flat there, some people that really don't care, you won't see that eyebrow or the movement of your up here where the wrinkles will come in. So that's another thing to look out for. Your forehead and your eyes on the side, how you smile, do your eyes smile, knowing that if somebody's empathetic or not, or trying to hide something, those are indicators to look at too. So our verbal indicators of cognitive load, lying is mentally taxing. Of course, it's tiring trying to make up crap. So it's better not to lie so you don't have to make up stuff and you'll have a better life that way. Subject must invent a story, ensure it's consistent, and monitor the interviewer's reaction simultaneously. This leads to the dead air delay, a noticeable lag between a question and an answer as the subject computes the best response. That's the biggest one. Linguistic distancing, using impersonal language, where somebody might say that woman instead of a name to psychologically distance themselves from the event or a person. That woman. So a lot of you might remember back in the day when Bill Clinton was going through the impeachment process, talking about if he had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. He referred to her as, I didn't have sexual relations with that woman. So that really is kind of a good example of what I'm talking about with that. Over-explaining. Again, we talked about that earlier, providing a mountain of irrelevant details to seem more credible. So we're trying to make ourselves look good, like we wouldn't do this because, I'm part of society. I'm on the board of this. I'm on the board of that, to make themselves feel like I'm not the type of person that would do this, instead of just, hey, I wasn't there. Instead of trying to provide all this other information, they're skipping the core, the details of the event in question. So if you didn't do it, you didn't do it. So you don't need to make up all those stories circling around what they have you in there for. So, but behavioral incongruence, that's a big one. This is the most critical sign to watch for. It occurs when the body contradicts the words. like the mismatched nod we talked about, which may or may not work depending on the culture or background, saying, no, I wasn't there, while the head is making a very slight subconscious nodding motion. The asymmetrical expressions, I can't read anymore. A crooked smile or a shrug that only involves one shoulder often suggests the emotion being displayed is forced rather than felt. So they're trying to force emotions to make it look like they really care, trying to mask showing empathy. So I'm going to go over a few of the interrogations of some famous serial killers and all that. And just remember, if you have some questions at the end, I know I'm flying through this. There's like a lot of information, but hopefully you guys will ask questions. You could see all that stuff. But one of the first ones here is a guy named Russell Williams. All right. So back in 2010, this guy was interrogation. He was a former Canadian Forces colonel. So this is almost where they're used to getting interviewed like this. So this is the real chess match with somebody like this, of that higher quality, higher rank. He's widely considered a master class in forensics interviewing. Detective Sergeant Jim Smith used a non-confrontational, data-driven approach. So the exposure of it was Smith started with mundane questions to Williams, gradually presenting incriminating evidence like a tire track matches in boot prints found a crime scene. So the result, after 10 hours, Williams, who had been a highly respected military commander, cracked, eventually providing a detailed confession and led investigators to locations of his victims' remains. Probably the good reference, this guy being a commander in that interrogation. And, the old, you can't handle the truth from the movie, trying to get him to break. And he did by using certain methods to build that rapport and then going for it. And they went for it on this guy finally after 10 hours. But the other one, Ted Bundy. Now, Bundy's interrogations were pretty unique because of his background. He had a law background and his attempts all the time trying to manipulate the process, being of a higher IQ. So that's the real big chess match. So, the exposure for years, Bundy maintained his innocence. However, during his final days on death row, he began a series of confession interviews with investigators like Robert Keppel and Bill Hagmaier. Now, Robert Keppel, the cool thing about Robert Keppel was back in the day when he was interviewing Bundy, volunteered to help profile the Green River Killer, which ended up being Gary Ridgway. And that was a big thing because Keppel, I'm very grateful I got to meet him. Back in the day, I just moved back from Florida after leaving the DOC. And at University of New Haven, Dr. Henry Lee, the forensics guy that everybody heard about, he was a friend of the family. My mom worked for the Connecticut State Police when she retired, right near her end of her career. Dr. Henry Lee was the head of the state police for a little bit, so she got to work for him for a while. So very nice man. I know he just recently passed, and even to this day, I can never understand anything he was saying. But Robert Keppel started working and being a professor at the Criminal Justice Department over at University of New Haven. And I got to sit in on a couple of his classes, just knowing his history. So it's cool. It's like seeing somebody you really look up to and all that. So it was pretty crazy. And I'm always grateful for that, being able to do that. So that was fun. The result in that particular thing with Bundy is by speaking in the third person. That's what Bundy was doing to speculate. We talked about earlier that, her, this, on the killer's motives. But Bundy eventually dropped the facade in the end there and confessed over 30 murders across several states to delay his execution. So he had motive there, but we did get to find out some of these other murders that were unsolved that he finally confessed to. So that was a good job by them to really, even though he was already in prison during the interrogation, that's something that we were able to get. Now, another one we talked about early is the Stephen McDaniel one. The interrogation of Stephen McDaniel for the murder of Laura Giddings is famous for McDaniel's stone-like demeanor. We talked about earlier, they're talking and they look like they're frozen. And he sat nearly motionless for hours, attempting to play the role of a concerned, shocked neighbor. So the exposure on this one was detectives used a confrontation style, presenting evidence of a master key and digital footprints. So the breaking point occurred when McDaniel realized his earlier media interview where he reacted on camera to the discovery of a body was being used against him. So that's what got him. So despite his attempt to maintain a catatonic state, the pressure led a full confession and a guilty plea. So they kind of sweated him out just by throwing information at him, even though he wasn't responding back. It finally got to him when he knew they had him. So now Gary Ridgway, we talked about. Ridgway was a suspect for decades, but was only arrested after DNA technology caught up to his crimes. So the exposure there was to avoid the death penalty. Ridgway agreed to cooperate with investigators. The interrogation lasted for months as detectives had to painstakingly walk him through dozens of cold cases from the 1980s. Ridgway ultimately confessed to 48 murders, though he claimed the number was closer to 71. The interrogations were vital because he provided specific details about the cluster sites where he left victims, which is amazing because when they did the IQ on Gary Ridgway, it was pretty low. So almost just above where he's not a very smart person. Even the coworkers that worked with him and all that, they thought he was too dumb to be the Green River Killer. They suspected it was this guy's too dumb. And that, unfortunately, that led to him killing more people. You never want to rule somebody out because IQ-wise, most serial killers are 90 or less. There's very rare that there are of the caliber of a Ted Bundy, or Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, high IQs. And especially the next one on our list, the highest IQ tested from a serial killer was, of course, Jeffrey Dahmer. Unlike many others, Dahmer's interrogation was marked by the chilling level of cooperation. He knew he was God. All the evidence was there in his house. So what is he going to sue? What is he going to try and hide? I'm holding all these body parts for my friend, so that wasn't going to work. So what caught with physical evidence in his apartment? He did not fight the process, but the exposure. Detective Dennis Murphy, Detective Patrick Kennedy built a rapport with Dahmer, treating him with the level of professional courtesy that encouraged him to speak freely. That's the important part. People got to realize when they give up, you still have to have that rapport to him because you want to make sure, they're admitting to certain things, but there might be other victims that he knows you're not going to find in that home. But if you build that rapport, get them more open and talking, then we might find out some other unsolved cases to give people closure. So it's important to keep that rapport. Even if they're dead to rights and all that, we have to keep it open to broader selection of being able to pick those things up. So the result was over 60 hours of interviews with Dahmer. He confessed to 17 murders. His detailed accounts allowed police to identify victims through dental records, their forensic analysis that would have been nearly impossible otherwise. So that's a big thing. And with that, when they interviewed him, if you ever seen some of that stuff, there's a lot of quotes that came out of it. But one of the big ones is, I got several tattoos, and I know Dahmer said that he didn't like to cannibalize people with tattoos. He said it tasted funny or whatever. So if you were tattooed, I guess you were safe from him. So that was one of the things he used to say. But that's the crazy part of it. And, the interrogations, are often the final chess match between investigators and offenders. While physical evidence provides the what, a successful interrogation provides the why and the where, often leading to discovery of victims that might have otherwise remained missing, which of course our main goal in interrogations is to make sure that we find out with a serial killer all the victims so we could give family closures, have people, get the proper burial, those types of things, unsolved crimes, things that we have to look into. So a great interrogation, properly done, usually we hopefully solidify a lot of those open ends and all that, and get enough information to put the suspect away. And again, give some closure on it to families. But there is the ethical warning. I just want to say in closing and all that with this ethical warning, even on a daily basis when you're talking to people, if you're a manager at work, how you're trying to investigate something, anything like that. The ethical warning, the Othello error. This is mistaking stress of being accused for the stress of being guilty. if you're brought in and you're not guilty, of course you're going to have stress because you just got accused of something you're not guilty of. But you also have stress of being guilty. So this is what we have to weigh. We want to make sure we don't make that error as we're questioning people. We're not questioning them as guilt, or we don't want to make that mistake and put the wrong person away because we're looking at that emotion improperly as we're funneling questions. Your confirmation bias, warning, you got to warn the audience here, not to go looking for the lies just because they are suspicious. That's the problem. We prejudge and all that. Just because I have information and know this guy's dead to rights, I still have to do everything by the book properly. Question just like I'm going to question the next person based off of what they're giving me. But I don't want to say, oh, you're guilty already, because then the questioning isn't going to be full and proper. And a lot of times, if you don't question, even if they are guilty and they are suspicious and we question it improperly, it could be thrown out in court and we could put somebody back on the street. So you have to be open to that. Now, our goal is not about the winning. Of course, we want to win and get all the information we can. It's more about seeking the truth, just to build a better communication, whether it be with our children when they're trying to get the truth out of them, or, the suspect, or if you're a higher level at work trying to question somebody to get that information. So, really look at it next time you're in a meeting or in a tough conversation. Remember, after everything I told you, don't look for that twitch. You want to look for the change, and we want to look for their truth. That way we know people well enough when they're not acting properly in our daily life. So we have to look out for that. But we have to get enough information when it's a suspect to make sure that we know how we're going to move through all this. But, I went through this pretty quickly. Hopefully you guys were coming into the last 15 minutes. I want to make sure if you have questions, make sure you let Gwen know. I know I went through this really quickly. There's a lot of different cases that are out there. There's a lot of different other ways of questioning people and all that as it comes. But there's a lot of video out there to look at what we talked about to really match it up, especially now when you watch some of these TV shows and how over the top it is. And it's really not that type of thing. But for now here, let's bring Gwen back on. Let's see what we have and see what you guys thought of today's episode. And we'll start thinking about what we're going to do for next week. What'd you think, Gwen?
It was great. I'm all into it all of the time. So
yeah.
Yeah. Anybody got any questions? I know some of you probably don't understand when Thomas is doing his lecture. It's hard for him to see the comments, so we don't pop them up. So at the end, we have people that are saying, hey, all this. Yeah. But I'm looking for questions. And
I look for those. And just in general, it is when you're questioning a suspect. All these things I went through, I know it's quick. Some stuff you may not understand. I try not to use too crazy big of, words or anything like that as we're looking at it. But this is stuff we use on a daily basis too. You want to look for those things, especially what we call our red flags when we meet people. Again, I've said this before. A lot of my friends know that lately, a lot of people get nervous to talk to me. Sometimes I didn't talk about telling what I used to do for a living because I'm always afraid because they're going to think he's always profiling me. So they're all like thinking they got something to hide and they're afraid. So none of them want to tell me. They don't want to face me or look me in the eye. It's funny.
I would think it was hilarious. So yeah.
Well, it is because I don't do that unless you give me a reason. I'm normal, everyday Tom, and I don't do that stuff. Because if I did, oh my God, I'd be mentally drained every day. I would be able to function. So, when I'm ready to do it, I have to really mentally prepare. Because remember, not only did I do this, but I'm also a shaman. So I pick up on energy too. So not only am I combating what I'm picking up from spirit guides, what I'm picking up from my training, what I'm picking up from my life experience, and how I'm trying to put that all together to question somebody and then pick up on their emotions and how they're trying to deliver stuff, put the puzzle together and funnel it into something where there was no story. Now there's a story, now there's fact, and now I have more evidence, and now I could get like a conviction. or
Okay.
get them
We
to
do have
admit.
one question from Carol Garcia. I don't know if you
Sure.
can see it, so you want me to just read it out to you?
Yeah.
What is the percentage of serial killers made by nature versus nurture?
It's hard to tell. That's the biggest thing. I think a lot of it is the nurture part of it. Nature is very hard. It all depends how their brain forms coming out of the womb. If there's issues with the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala, that type of thing, our limbic system, how we're able to have impulse controls and all that. We all grow up with some sort of trauma and how we work through it. But a lot of times, if you don't work through it properly from that young age, we learn everything we pretty much learn is, our confidence, our survival abilities and all that are really done at an early age before critical thinking kicks in. Our main thing as a kid, and I talked about this on another show just recently, and I want to thank Tim Shaw for having me on the other day on his show to talk about serial killers, but we did bring this up. And, as a kid, your main thing is, okay, what do I got to do to be safe?
Mm-hmm.
What do I got to do to make friends? And then in some cases of abuse, or neglect, what do I got to do to get my next meal? So these are the things that are going on simply, but those are things that we need as we're adults too. We have other things we think about, but those are our core things that we're trying to survive. So nature versus nurture, really it depends on, the nurture side of how we're brought up and to be able to get through those things and things that have happened to us and what the catalyst might be. But being born, is there a genetic thing that's predisposed? Possibly. If your dad was a mean person type of killer with no conscience or psychopath or, antisocial disorder behavior, which most, serial killers have. Those are the things to look at. Mental malfunction too, there's the old McDonald triad, where some kids, depending on how they're raised or depending how their brain works, that they might wet the bed into, their preteen years. They might, abuse animals for some reason. They like the fact that they like to light fires as a pyro and all that. Are these things learned or are they through the mind? So these are the things that we question, putting all this out together. So nature versus nurture could be a little of both, but I really lean towards the nurture part of it. I think a lot of these inmates, when they were interviewed, especially if you want a good book, Mindhunter, that's a good one that shows all the interviews with some of these serial killers. And there's a pattern. There's that McDonald triad pattern. There's head injuries when they were younger. There's abuse at home, neglect, especially with Dahmer. Dahmer was neglected so much that a lot of the things when he became a cannibal, he tried to, drill in their heads and put acid in and try and turn them into zombies so they would stay with them, so they wouldn't want to leave. And when that didn't work, he went into the fact that, he started consuming these people. I think what went through his mind was, now I have their DNA, I have their power, their essence, and they'll never leave me now because I consumed them. So that's like that neglect part of it, that bipolar type of disorder on top of the antisocial. So that goes into it too.
Okay. So Brian Bohal, I'm not saying that right probably, but he says, how do you turn your gift off so that you do not receive everyone's emotions? Example, you walking around them all.
It took me a long time. Really, do I turn it fully off? No. But you have to realize that what you're going to be up against, you have to ground yourself. It's all about grounding your mind, knowing that you're going to be receiving a lot of information when it comes to that side of things. Is there a foolproof way? No, I think more of it is you got to know who you are as a person and as a seer. You know the information that's coming in, you're used to getting it. How am I going to ground myself and how am I going to filter the information is more the way you want to look at it. Taking it all in, only you could allow that. Again, if I get angry, I allow myself to get angry. If somebody's yelling at me and I get angry, I allowed myself to react to that. So if I'm getting information or I'm getting people's energy, if I don't ground myself, I'm allowing myself to react to that. So if they're upset, I'm letting it in. So I have to put up that grounding shield and all that, and go through that. Probably some of the people that are really good at that, Lee and Matt, they do their grounding and shielding techniques and all, but that's something you could look up online, or you could go see certain people in meditation and how they do that. So if you need assistance with that, of course, reach out to our Wardruna group. We're more than happy to go over those types of techniques with you. That's something we do with healing and helping other psychic mediums or seers or anybody that could, reel that in. So.
All right. Carol Garcia, she says, has it truly been found that serial killers' frontal lobe has not fully developed?
Occasionally there could be. It all depends on x-rays, MRIs that are done. Fully developed, technically, maybe not. It could be from a birth defect, like I said. It could be from an accident.
Mm-hmm.
Some kid's a perfectly normal kid, then he's swinging on the swing and does, our kids like to go up really high.
Oh,
All of a sudden they flip over and they hit their head. They bounce back from it, but really the damage could have been done. And it may not have caused a bleed where technically it could kill them if they don't check it out. But
right. Part of her question, second part also is saying, and do you know how many people have been tested?
A lot of times they will test a lot of these people, more so now than they used to back. There's the heightened moments of serial killers and all that. A lot of times now, with so much video evidence, DNA now, some of these people are looking for different ways to do these things. But 80s at the highest point, they really weren't really looking at that. So this is like newer developments, especially to take them in. They're going to be taking those x-rays or MRIs, especially to see if there's a misdevelopment there, to see if they could stand in court or anything like that, or if they're going to go on probation, they have to look at that, if we should let them out, if they could get on parole. So those are the things they have to look at and check those things out, because it does start to come into the situation now where that affects them for the rest of their lives, and they have no impulse control because of the way the brain developed and all that. So that's a possibility on that.
Right. Now, Brian is saying thank you. And guys, do we have any more questions? Sorry, guys.
Oh, no, it's okay. I know you're gagging over there. You went down the wrong pipe.
I tell you. Sometimes it does. All right, guys, any more questions?
Yeah, so just so everybody knows, next week, pending on life happening, really planning on next week. So if you guys are watching, make sure you watch again. Make sure you rewatch the episode, the episodes if you missed anything, just to catch up. Because these first few episodes, I just want to teach you guys what I've learned, how I look at things, how my colleagues looked at things, and we're going to really get into the point where we're really going to dive in and want you guys to be involved. And as we're talking about a killer and you hear little things about their upbringing and their life, you're really going to put it together, what you learned, in how law enforcement or people like myself, the profilers, how they look at things and how they're able to get the information and how we pull that stuff. So it becomes more exciting, especially when you watch a movie now and you hear all this stuff. You're like, oh, I was watching the show and they said that's a technique they use. And that's like, that might be, as they're acting in the movie, that may be they have bipolar disorder, or, oh, this one is disorganized. They're probably more of a sociopath. So we're going to learn all that stuff. It just makes it exciting just to experience life and how we look at things, look at red flags, how we keep ourselves protected. But also when you watch a movie or a TV show, a lot of times if they're done right, it's pretty close to the real thing, or they kind of skim at it, but you're able to see it. So you're going to look at things in a different 360 view. Hopefully I'm able to provide that for you by watching the show. But I think next week, I think it's a big one. This is one that I like to do for teachers, people in schools, parents, and all that. Things to look out for in your child. Profiling wise, I think it's more of how we develop our children, things to look out for, when to step in and get somebody some help, those types of things, when to help our family and friends. You could see your nephew's acting weird and you want to get him help, and how to deal with the parents, especially the ones that are neglecting, and how to get, them to switch around and get their kids some help, or to pay attention, or to get somebody in that's going to bring them to get that help. It is our generations and all that. We have to try and cut a lot of this down. We have more knowledge now than we used to. So avoiding a lot of these monsters in the future is potentially there. And next week, pending, we might have to delay it to another week, depending on how everything goes. But that way we could go over all that. And hopefully that'll be helpful for the parents out there, teachers, what they see when their students come to class, when their behavior changes, how to react to it, how to get them help, how to do it properly through the right channels, and especially again with Wardruna, the healing group I'm in, we are able to provide those outlets for you with our group, and of course reach out to us and any of that. But I think, does Carol have another question there?
She does. She also told you thank you for the other stuff.
Yeah,
She
no
said, do
problem.
you know how many cases have been solved by the use of dirt, bug, slime versus the use of DNA?
Well, a lot of times with the bugs, dirt, sometimes a certain bug and all that may be in a certain area. Let's say we're in town and there's a certain area where they found a body and those bugs are specifically in that area. Then we go to our suspect's house and all of a sudden one of those bugs is in one of their shoes. That's a potential way of putting somebody at the scene in a way. And a lot of times some of these bugs, if they're around the body, they could consume that blood and all that. And let's say that somebody cut their finger, it could consume the blood of a suspect. And that way we could get, DNA from that. I know she's talking about no DNA. But yeah, anything, dirt, bugs, anything that's in a crime scene could potentially be evidence. Like we talked about evidence last week. If you want to watch that show, it might be helpful for this question too. Everything and anything, you never want to skip over it. You never want to assume, yeah, that's just dirt. No, we want to collect that dirt from around the body too, because there might be something microscopic in there that might break the case open. So we have to be cognizant of bugs in the area that's out of the ordinary, slime, anything, especially, let's say the person threw somebody in the bathtub, that sludge in the drain is going to have DNA on it or other types of evidence, hair evidence, anything like that. Because we don't know what they did if they washed off in the tub, or we got to check everything on a certain location. So.
All right. Anything else, guys? We are at an hour.
Oh, yeah, we are at the hour. And again, thank you, everybody that watched. Again, if you missed it, watch it again. Watch all the other episodes up until now. I think we're on number 5. So we're getting there.
This is 5, yes.
Yeah, we're putting together the model of the serial killer and the model of everything to look out for against, to be careful, those red flags, help our children. And we'll be talking an episode about victims probably this following week. We'll try and put something together, maybe have some people on that have experienced that if they're willing to go through that, or that way we could talk about what to look out for victim-wise, how to stay safe. Little things to practice on a daily basis to the point where it becomes habit and not where you're psychotically trying to protect everything, have 9 million locks on your door or anything like that. Just simple stuff that anybody could do where it doesn't create too much havoc in your life. And we'll do all that stuff. That'll probably be the following week. So make sure you tune in every week anyways at 8 o'clock here. And that way we could go over all the cool stuff about serial killers, and hopefully it's jogged that interest and answer a lot of the questions. And again, I appreciate all you guys. I appreciate you, Gwen. And
Thank
again, we're at the hour. I think we're going to end here. Like I always say, thank you guys for tuning in and going down the rabbit hole with us. Have a